For your lab practical standard in the nervous system, you will have to identify specific regions of a mammalian brain, highlighting the functions of those particular regions and being able to discern between them. The standard reads, I can identify major regions and structures of a mammalian brain and explain the function of each, and it covers section 11.4 in your textbook. These slides are going to discuss the human brain, but you will be dissecting and tested on a sheep brain. Okay, same heading, but we're only talking about the primary organ of the nervous system today. We're talking about the brain. It is in charge of everything. It integrates our sensations. It controls our movement, our thinking, our personalities, our speech, our ability to read and execute decisions. It is the control center. There are two cerebral hemispheres or halves of the brain. And there's this large midline running in the sagittal plane that separates the left and right hemispheres. There's only one spot that connects them, the corpus callosum, which isn't viewable from the outside, but it's a small, almost earthworm-shaped region that connects the left and right side and allows them to communicate. In someone who's had this region severed, they will almost have two independently acting brains because they're unable to communicate. The ridges and grooves of the brain also have specific names. So the gyri are the white parts of the brains that you can see. So they are the ridges, the 3D portions. And then the grooves are sulci. So all these dark grooves that exist throughout the brain structure, those are called sulci. And we'll name a couple of the most important ones. The central sulcus separates the precentral gyrus and the postcentral gyrus. I'm going to put the rest of these on here. Okay, so the central sulcus is right here. It's that extra dark line right there. And what it does is it acts as a barrier between the part of your brain that's responsible for motor function, which is the precentral gyrus, and the part that is responsible for sensory function. And because they're on either side of that sulcus, they can communicate really easily. So you sense the world with your postcentral gyrus, and you decide what to do. You have motor control because of your precentral gyrus. The fissures are the deepest grooves. They're not sulci, they're very, very deep. And so this main one that we saw running in the sagittal plane is your longitudinal fissure. You also have a transverse fissure when you're looking at a lateral view of the brain that separates the cerebrum from the cerebellum. And so that would be right here. The cerebrum is the superior, very foldy part of the brain. The cerebellum means tiny brain in Latin, and it's the small structure towards the posterior side. Okay, what do the individual lobes of the brain do? You'll notice in this picture their separation is really rough. I won't put a pin right here and ask you if it's parietal or occipital. I will try to be very clear about where these lobes are. Also note that the frontal lobe of a human is way larger in relationship to the rest of the brain than the sheep's is. So what does that frontal lobe do? Why is ours so big? It controls higher order thinking, concentration, planning, problem solving. All of the ways that we interact with the world and make executive decisions are controlled in your frontal lobe. Fun fact, it's not finished developing until you're 25. It's one of the last pieces of you that finishes its development. And so a lot of people credit the choices that young people make to underdeveloped frontal lobes. Your temporal lobe, sitting here on the lateral side of your brain, is because it's close to your ear, a lot of it has to do with auditory function. So hearing and understanding speech. There are pieces of it that respond to music and reading and patterns. In the back of your brain, your occipital lobe ironically controls vision. So there are nerves that go all the way to the front of your head that connect to your eyeballs. And the images that they receive, the light that bounces in there, travels to the occipital lobe to get processed. So the occipital lobe not only receives the information, but it processes it and says to the rest of your brain what it is that you're seeing. Lastly, the parietal lobe has regions for speech and word choice, also language. A lot of our communication skills are centered here in the parietal lobe. That little brain, cerebellum, is primarily for coordination and balance. So our ability to walk, our ability to perform in sports-related activities or any sort of physical activities where we need coordination or fine motor skills are going to be housed here. This is a more detailed picture of what these regions of the brains are doing. So we have, for instance, a speech area that sits in your frontal lobe called Broca's area. Here is an image highlighting that motor precentral gyrus and the sensory postcentral gyrus. We have a special area for sensing speech. It's called Wernicke's area on the left side of the brain. So lots of different independent little areas that the brain can be broken up to. The other part I want to highlight in NERVE.5 is the brain stem. So if we've cut into the brain and we're looking more towards the base, maybe say the cerebellum would be right here. Inside the brain, we can finally see that corpus callosum. This was the piece that connected the left and right hemispheres of our brains. But let's start with the thalamus. So the thalamus looks kind of like an egg to me, and it will on the sheep as well. There is a central spot. And the thalamus's role is to sort of direct impulses to the right region of the cerebrum, of the upper brain. So when you're getting messages from your hands to your arms to your brainstem, it will have to travel through the hypothalamus before the hypothalamus will say, send that message to this part of the brain. The hypothalamus is responsible for all of our homeostatic maintenance. So blood pressure, heart rate, body temperature, hunger, sleep, all controlled by the hypothalamus. This was our main control center when we discussed homeostatic mechanisms. It's named because it is below the thalamus. The midbrain also relays messages just like the thalamus does, but it's just from the spinal cord to the thalamus. The pons, same thing, but it mostly relays impulses from the cerebellum, so that coordination and balance piece comes in here. And it also regulates the rhythm of your breathing. So something you can do unconsciously, does not require higher order thinking. Lastly, the medulla oblongata, the base of the brainstem, is for all of your non-vital reflexes. So when you cough, when you sneeze, when you swallow, all of those are controlled in the basic brainstem. You'll notice your need to stay alive functions are all controlled in your brainstem, so you can have extensive damage to your cerebrum and potentially still be physically alive because all of your basic functioning is controlled in your really ancient, less evolved brainstem.